Hello and welcome to Shalltears. My name is Lauren, and today I'm going to be watching an AniNews video. Who is Shalltear? BloodFallen. Ooh, vampires! I just watched a Castlevania episode also, so I'm just like, it's a vampire kind of day, apparently. I've been enjoying these, obviously, and it seems like y'all have been enjoying them too. So we're down into Shalltear. This is a long series of Shalltear videos. There's like 4 of them, which is so many. So I think it'll be fun. I will still probably be like splitting them up because I did discover like at least one other creator who's doing like free run content that I really enjoyed. So like I think I'll do a little bit of that as well. But like we're going to be looking at Shalltear for a while. So I don't really want to waste any more time. I will remind you that these videos do come out earlier on Patreon than they do on YouTube. And on Patreon, we also have, full episodes of Overlord and full episodes of lots of other things, such as, Castlevania, like I just mentioned. So we have lots of stuff over there. If you're watching this on YouTube, just know it exists. You can find it in the description box below. Also, we have 2 other channels, Americans Learn and Chicago Reacts. Both of those are listed below as well. Join us there if you haven't. I don't want to waste any more time, so let's go. I like that comment. Now that No Nut November's over, can we finally do Shalltear? Good.
Shalltear BloodFallen, the Bloody Valkyrie, and Best Chair. I hope you're ready for a long one because she's definitely got a lot to her.
Indeed.
First, a quick plug of the Bay merch. Now let's do as we usually do and find out who is Shalltear. Let's begin.
Okay.
Shalltear is the floor guardian of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floors of Nazarick, which essentially in their own right comprise one big floor known as the Catacombs. It's a labyrinth filled with all manners of traps and tricks, designed to wear down, delay, or destroy an enemy invading force. And Shalltear's job was to be the first line of defense against any intruders who made it through all of that. As a matter of fact, when dealing with lone intruders, Momonga would typically show up to personally take them out, and he would bring Shalltear for protection and support. So the pair of them have a fairly long history of cooperation together. You might say then that Shalltear's job was to be a shock trooper, Ainz's personal bodyguard, and an expert skirmisher.
Which is interesting then, that on the New World, he brings Albedo with him all the time. If usually it would be Shalltear. That could also be like a reason Shalltear is kind of beefing with Albedo a little bit. Because she's like, but wait, this is my job. I'm the one who does this. I don't know. I'm totally speculating.
Would have been something nice to start off with, but her creator didn't seem to come up with anything particularly detailed, or even have much in the way of a clearly defined role or job in the broader scheme of Nazarick. As we will soon see, he had a couple very specific and conspicuous areas of interest during her creation.
It's cool looking.
In any case, let's start with the basics. Shalltear is, of course, a vampire. A fictional race of undead monsters with supernatural...
Hey, Castlevania! I've seen that episode! Speaking of...
It's only fitting that the guardian of the catacombs be a supremely powerful undead. Vampires are a classic gothic horror monster. Their history dates way back to 18th century folklore, involving rumors and superstitions about corpses and their decomposition process.
I have watched quite a few videos about vampires and their history. I may or may not link one. I think they're over on the Learns channel. Just saying. Just gonna plug that one for ya.
Though the legends back then bore little resemblance to the modern versions. It was actually Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, which would—
He looks so inquisitive! Look how baby his eyes are! Oh my gosh, if you take away his beard, he looks like Haley Joel Osment! What? He does though, doesn't he? Like, I'm not crazy. He absolutely 100% looks like our boy Haley Joel, right? Right? He does.
Would go on to provide the basis for the modern vampire genre, particularly their abilities and powers, though the myths would still continue to develop through over a century of fiction writers. For instance, powerful vampires can create lesser vampires, and these lesser vampires essentially become thralls to the greater vampires who created them. they become loyal servants who can't disobey their master. Often, their old personality and sense of morality disappear entirely, and they become the same breed of evil, sinister creature as that which created them.
We saw that with Dracula's
Though in other
wives.
cases, the lesser vampires could retain their individuality and personality, despite still being bound to serve the will of their master. Shalltear BloodFallen's name sounds quite fitting for a vampire, wouldn't you say? But it doesn't seem like it was based on anything specific, sort of like it was just plucked out of thin air. BloodFallen, or Fallen Blood, is probably a reference to her vampire race. Fallen is a euphemism for death, and vampires are well known as drinkers of blood.
Oh yeah, I
Shalltear,
guess.
on the other hand,
That's so funny. I never actually thought about that. I was like, thinking of spilling blood, it has fallen to the ground out of one's neck kind of thing. And Shalltear just like, I'll make you cry, bye, fall in your blood kind of thing. And so that's kind of what I was like, thought of her name. There shall be tears.
Is a little less obvious. However, the full name itself would fit right at home with names of other iconic Japanese vampire girls, like Ramilia Scarlet from the Toho franchise. In fact, Shalltear shares a lot of thematic similarities with the Toho vampire girls. The primary theme of Shalltear BloodFallen's design is the cross between a young, childlike and innocent little girl with a vicious, dangerous, predatory vampire. But can something really be cute and innocent, but also predatory, dangerous, or downright evil?
Yes.
Shows like Toho and Overlord seek to explore this dynamic, bringing us back to our recurring Gap Moe theme, a common element throughout not only Overlord, but Japan in general.
We have talked a lot about Gap Moe in this series.
It's when a particular thing is expected to be one way, but then embodies something completely conflictive or opposite. For Shalltear, you can see this paradoxical duality in something as simple as her visual design. Her appearance is that of a goth lolly, basically pale complexion and Victorian-era clothes on a little girl. The popularity of this style of fashion was actually the product of a fashion trend in the 1990s and early 2000s in Japan.
I kind of
The
remember
look is reminiscent
that.
of something that you might find on an old Victorian-era doll. It's
I have
seen as
several of
dark and
those.
exotic, but also cute.
Or at least I used to. Like, there exist at my parents' house. Like, a whole bunch of these little doll things. It's like, why would you get a child these dolls? I was like, I can't play with them. Like, I can't do anything with them. They look cute, and like I liked their clothes, like their little outfits. They were pretty, but like I definitely broke one. At least I broke her face off, and my mom was really mad and glued her face back on. But I was just like, I'm 6. Why did you get me a doll I can't play with? Like, logic me that, mother, please. Like, and then even worse than that, 10 years later, my grandmother got me another one. And I'm 16 and I don't collect dolls. I'm like, what? Because I did collect some stuff. I collected like music boxes. I had a whole lot of those. I collected like these little shoes. Like I've got like a whole bunch of these. Just like even just on my desk, I've got like a couple of them. It's like these are things that I was collecting, like little shoes like that. Like I've got all these little knickknacks and stuff. I got like little Lego guys. Like, I don't know. Like it's not like I don't collect stuff because I do, but I'm just like the doll. Oh, speaking of Lego guys, you can't really see him well, but like, he's invisible because of the green, but still, the point is, I have always collected stuff. And no, I was like, I don't know what she's doing. Anyway, totally like irrelevant. Back to Shalltear.
The doll-like qualities and cute frilly dress make one look disarming and innocent, but the clothing being a deep, dark color creates a haunting beauty and hints at something more sinister. This style of clothing fits a young female vampire especially well, and is quite common in Toho since it reinforces the Gap Moe motif. Her personality also maintains this duality. On the one hand, she's a haughty, sadistic dominatrix who lords over others, one who delights in abusing her power and inflicting suffering.
See, he said haughty, like haughty, but I heard haughty, like haughty.
On her underlings, or anyone else
HOTT,
that
hot
falls
to
into her
go, babe.
clutches. On the other hand, she's got an element of the irresponsible, helpless, adorable little sibling archetype, one that is always getting into trouble or making mistakes. But in a way, that's what makes her so amusing and endearing. Both these aspects of her personality come from her creator, Peroronchino. The first was the way he designed her to be, and the second was something that he may not have intended to actually happen, but which may have happened anyway because of the mechanics governing how the NPCs gained life. I say may because it's hard to really know for sure what was going on in his head. In any case, there are three main determinants of an NPC's personality. The first and most important is the information written about them in their biographies by their creator. The second are their innate gameplay features like karma, race, and class.
Okay.
And lastly, they also adopt subtle elements of the personality of their creator, particularly in the ways that weren't strongly specified by their biography and lore or their gameplay features. In Shalltear's case, the bulk of her personality comes from her lore and background, though it's not unlikely that she adopted some of Peroronchino's personality as well. But in order to determine the validity of that statement, we first need to see what kind of person he was, as well as what his intentions were.
All right. I mean, we know a little bit about this. I know that he's talked about this a bit
This
before.
guy was kind of a degenerate, and by that, I mean he had a lot of weird fetishes. He's the type of guy to join an online community, and instead of interact in conversation with people, he'd be the one to post 90% of the content in the NSFW channel. Suffice to say, he had a pretty massive collection of, let's say, not safe for work stuff.
Oh, good.
For the most part, he kept his weird tastes to himself,
Okay, well, that's
only
something.
sharing
at
it with a small group of other individual guildmates, who were pretty chill and didn't mind it too much, one of which was Momonga, though sometimes he'd get a little too excited and let his darker tastes slip out in the company of others. Of course, Peroronchino wouldn't even notice, and he'd just continue to prattle on about whatever weird stuff that he was talking about.
And everyone's like,
Unsurprisingly,
okay.
when the opportunity to design an NPC arose, Peroronchino used it to provide an outlet for all of his biggest fetishes. And as usual, I'm going to be explaining each of them in exhaustive overanalysis.
Oh, good.
So
Oh,
if
good,
you're someone who's
yay!
comfortable with this type of conversation, then you might want to skip this part.
It's too late.
I tried
I'm
my
here. I'm
best
in it.
to really tone it down heavily from what was stated in the source material. But let's get to it. Shalltear is the embodiment of the word fetish. Not only does she have many herself, her appearance and character is also designed to appeal to a specific variety as well. She's meant to have that sexual allure to her. Peroronchino made sure that on top of her goth lolly outfit, she also had a wide selection of dresses, nurse uniforms, maid outfits, bunny suits, swimsuits, and so on.
I mean, I do
But
like her white dress.
Fortunately for us,
and
we
mask
never
thing.
really get to see them. Even her dialect was designed in a way to be seductive. She speaks in a form of Japanese that is stereotypically associated with high-class courtesans or prostitutes from the Japanese feudal age,
Cool.
and is meant to evoke a subtle seductiveness. So, whereas Peroronchino attempted to suppress his darker desires, he made sure that Shalltear could be very open with them. Her every act is designed to exude a degree of sexuality. Of course, this stands in contrast to her body, which is immature and childlike, implying Peroronchino's interest in lollies. The popularity of lolly is a bit of a weird thing in Japan, but supposedly it ties into the broader concept of moe. Basically, the rationale is that small cute things evoke feelings of brotherly love, adoration, and protective instincts. And of course, when people like something, some are probably going to fetishize it. This is taken a step further with Shalltear, where she pretends to have a mature figure, despite having the body of a child. It's often said that a woman showing just a little bit of skin is more appealing than showing lots of it. The hint itself could be
Leave
more
something to the
alluring and
imagination.
attractive than the actual thing. Perhaps there's something similar going on here with Shalltear, with how she pretends not to be flat-chested, but when getting called out on it, she gets all embarrassed and flustered. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Peroronchino's goal with this was to provide a subtle hint at her childlike qualities. There is at least some part of her design that is meant to evoke childlike innocence. After all, it does accentuate the gap moe as well, since it enhances—
And it is always like sadder when a child is turned into a vampire like this. It gets creepy. Like, just like think about Claudia from Interview with the Vampire, like that whole thing. I think in the show, I've only seen like one episode of the show, but like, not because I didn't like it. It's because at the time it wasn't available anywhere except for like Showtime, and you could only watch one episode. So that's why. But now it's available on Netflix, so I'm gonna watch it. But like, I think that Claudia is a little bit older than when Kirsten Dunst was Claudia in the movie. Because like she was like 7, she looked like 9, like she was really little looking, and then she becomes this like grown woman as a vampire, and she's still like 9 though, and it's just like, oof, very creepy, very upsetting.
This is the contrast between her dangerous evil vampire side and her innocent childlike side. As for her own fetishes now, as much as you may think that they aren't a necessity to explaining Shalltear herself, they are in fact some of the most important aspects of her character.
Interesting.
After all,
Okay.
if her entire personality is based on them, then they'll completely define how she interacts with others. And while we don't have her character bio to reference, we do know that she's demonstrated an arousal in a wide variety of different things, from a range of bodily fluids to necrophilia? I mean, vampires tend to have underling vampires, so Pararoncino made sure she had a harem of pretty vampire ladies to sleep with. And vampires are technically undead, so that classifies it as necrophilia, right?
Does it?
It's
No, I don't think so.
Shalltear to have every fetish that he could think of, or
That's
just
possible.
a bunch of different random ones.
Like, okay, this is again, I don't know. I feel like for it to be actual necrophilia, the body has to be just dead, right? The undead can move around, they have a little bit of autonomy, there's some sensation there. Like, it's not, they're not a dead body, it's not a corpse, you know? So I feel like therein lies a pretty significant difference. Otherwise, Buffy Summers has a lot of explaining to do.
But of all of them, she seems to have 2 main interests: other women and Ainz. Normally though, she just comes across as someone who is attracted to other women, primarily undead, though she has no problem with the living either, and would just as easily settle for men. Anyway,
She's like, let's just bone.
Shalltear's fundamental nature is that of a sadist. She enjoys abusing and torturing women in less than humane ways. Shalltear is a quintessential dominatrix who asserts her authority over others, turning them into her submissive slaves. It's heavily implied through this that Shalltear is a big fan of BDSM. And if you don't know what that means, you can Google it. Just
Not really though. Again,
she takes every
because a big part of that is the safe, sane, and consensual, and it seems like she's not into any of that part of it.
Aspect of that acronym and applies it to their fullest extent. Now, the word abuse can be thrown around rather loosely to mean treating someone else poorly, but what Shalltear does fits the strictest and most traditional meaning of the term. A method by which the abuser trains the abusee, warping and distorting their personality and psychology in order to serve the whims of the abuser. An abuser typically uses some of the classic techniques of operant conditioning, most often punishment. Basically, they punish undesired behavior with pains, suffering, and other negative outcomes. These terms are the product of a rather famous set of psychology experiments in the early 1930s, done by a man named B.F. Skinner. The most famous of which is probably the Skinner's box.
Yes.
A set of mice are placed inside a cage, and a lever is placed inside the box, which produces different effects. When the effects are positive, the mice quickly learn to press that lever often. When the effects are negative, the mice just as quickly learn to avoid that lever entirely. It was later shown that this effect could be replicated rather easily in dogs, humans, and other animals.
Yep.
Which now brings us to how it's relevant to explain Shalltear's abuse. Often, a victim of abuse is helpless to fight back, so they subconsciously adopt behaviors that make it less likely for the abuser to want to try and hurt them. The thing about this is that even the abuser is acting out of the subconscious desire to have power and control, meaning both individuals are undergoing operant conditioning. The abuser is rewarded with compliance, and the victim does whatever they can to avoid being abused. It becomes a process of learning that is entirely habitual and subconscious. What makes abuse actual abuse is not the harm itself, but the fact that the process causes some pretty insidious long-term changes in the psychology of the victim, as the habits of avoiding abuse become ingrained in their personality permanently. Shalltear is a perfect example of this classical form of abuser. I've already mentioned this, but she has a selection of high-level minions called Vampire Brides, and they're subjected to all types of abuse from Shalltear. She molds them, as well as any other woman who catches her interest, into perfectly obedient servants. For one of her underlings to displease her in any way might mean she spends the night or indeed several weeks, making its every waking moment a living hell. And as a
Poor
level
guys.
100 NPC,
Poor little guys.
she's able to do whatever she wants by force. She will often shame or degrade them too, almost as often as she subjects them to pain and suffering. The only thing they can do to avoid this is to try your best to avoid displeasing her. It's after a few weeks or months that any victim would become an obedient slave who learns to pick up on the subtle cues of her mood and temperament in order to always keep her happy.
Yeah.
Though the problem for them is that Shalltear is capricious and a bit quick to anger. Since she is a sadist who actually enjoys causing suffering, she may just choose to do so on a whim, for seemingly no reason at all. Her minions don't just learn to not displease her,
Something
they
that
learn to
might
become
make
passive,
someone angry
docile,
one day, doesn't do it the
obedient.
next, and
If they
then
can't
vice
avoid
versa.
ticking her
Something that
off,
was
or if
fine
she's
is
just
suddenly
going to
not
randomly
fine.
abuse someone, then at least they could avoid attracting
Right.
her attention.
Not
If they
stressful
stand
at
out
all.
in any way or show any kind of individuality, they attract her notice, and thus she may decide to take out her frustrations on them. Through this, she breaks their spirit down and stamps out their personality and ego. In the end, the only thing that they should be concerned with is how best to serve Shalltear, and eventually, that is the only thing they end up thinking about. But that's not to say that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. I mean,
Really?
if that tunnel led to a dead end, and that light was a poorly lit candle about to go out, but it's still a light to look forward to nonetheless. Only
Maybe she'll be
after their
nice.
spirits are thoroughly broken are they offered anything that could be considered remotely as a reward for loyal obedience. It's offered to the whole collective of servants, all of the vampire brides. And it comes in the form of opportunities to feast on others and drink blood. Such rewards are often minor and offered sparingly, but in contrast to the torture that
That is
Shalltear
something.
normally subjects them to, it would seem like benevolent generosity and kindness of the highest degree. They become addicted to pursuing the rewards as much as they fear and avoid the punishments. And just in case you didn't catch on, her abuse is of the not safe for work kind, so her minions are slaves in more ways than one.
Yikes.
It's implied that she and her many vampire brides routinely indulge in nightly activities. There's no doubt that she expects her servants to serve her in bed as much as they do outside of it. But a lot of this behavior wasn't in the anime at all, and it was only hinted at in the light.
Yeah, it
But
really
we
didn't
saw
seem
it
to be
much
mentioned
more
too much in
clearly
the anime.
in the original source material,
Good.
the web novel, available for free on a Japanese website that allowed users to write and share their own stories. The web novel was basically an early draft of Overlord,
Oh,
and there is quite a difference between the two versions.
cool.
So much so, in fact, that the canons of the two series actually diverged from each other and went into entirely different directions. The publisher of the light novel also probably restricted the author, Maruyama, from including subjects that were too risque or offensive in the official release.
Yeah,
I
like you
point
want it
these
to
two
be
facts
more
out because
appealing to a
there's
wider
an
group
entire
of people.
arc involving Arsh, the female wizard from Foresight, and it was removed from the transition from web novel to light novel entirely. Needless to say, it heavily involved Shalltear. You see, web novels typically encourage more elements of fan interaction and participation. And so Maruyama had put up a poll during the worker invasion arc, asking fans whether Arsh should live or die. And they had ended up voting for her to live. This
Oh.
was apparently a disappointing result for Maruyama.
He's like,
since
I want to kill her.
in the web novel, he would later write in the light novels that she was to die, hinting that he had preferred this outcome instead. He wanted a grittier story, one that was less romantic and one that didn't give cute girls plot armor. For every damsel like Soiree rescued by a hero like Sibas, there should be a Ninya killed by Clementine, or an Arsh who died to Shalltear. That's not to say that women couldn't be strong and competent, like we have Blue Rose or Enri.
It's true.
But that also doesn't
yeah.
mean that they can't be weak and vulnerable.
Oh, and it also makes more sense that they'd be more likely to, like, not like woman would be more likely to die. Literally any human is more likely to die to Shalltear than like anything. Like, it just makes sense that they die. Like, when a character exists and like, oh, it's like it's so obvious they're only still alive because of plot armor. That's frustrating. It's like, no, it's like, but okay, they're alive only because the plot demands it. It would make more sense if they were dead.
He felt that it was out of character for Ainz to spare Arsh, and ended up avoiding such polls in the future, when he realized how frustrated it made him to have to take the story in a different direction from what he intended. Though at the time of writing the web novel, he had already ended up committing to sparing Arsh. So what happened was, Foresight had actually managed to negotiate with Ainz to ensure that Arsh's life would be spared, and Shalltear proceeded to ask to have her as a pet. Literally. What we got instead of Arsh's swift, merciful death was Arsh's slow descent into being Shalltear's trained pet and sex slave. This of course included a collar, ears, and a tail. You can use your imagination to figure out how that tail was properly secured to her body. Ainz had told Shalltear not to hurt Arsh, but for the most part, he didn't really care about her that much, so he had left her in Shalltear's care.
I do not remember any of
Shalltear
this from
made
the
sure
anime.
to enjoy herself. There's actually a fairly lengthy excerpt from the web novel that goes into very vivid details of Arsh's experience as a pet.
Like,
I'll link to that.
And just in general, like, I don't remember much about the worker uprising in the anime at all. Like, I don't remember, like, barely anything about any of them. Because, again, they didn't matter. And if any of them had stuck around, maybe I'd care. But, like, I just don't remember. It's like, of the characters who are not Nazarikian or whatever, like, the ones I remember the most about are Suare. And it's like, I remember really liking, especially that one lizard guy, but I don't remember his name. Like, I just remember I really liked him, and I was, like, really devastated when he died, and I was really happy when they brought him back as a permanent, like, I don't know, like, was he brainwashed? I don't know. Like, they brought him back, though, to serve Ainz Algo, and I was like, yeah, good. At least he's alive. He didn't seem to lose his snark, which is good. Like, and then, obviously, Princess Renner, but she's basically from Nazarick. I mean, I can't remember Gajef, whatever his name is. I kept calling him Stroganoff. The really good warrior guy. Like, again, like, there's so many things that's like, I don't remember, like, anything about these people. And it's like, the humans, whatever. I don't remember much about any of these humans. I remember making fun of Brain a lot. You know? So I remember more about him, but only because I made fun of him all the time. Like, and these workers, they built up the workers a little bit, and then, like, nothing came of it. So now he's talking about this worker magician lady, and I'm like, who? I don't remember her, like, at all. So I'm sorry about that.
Down below so you can read for yourself the cruel, unimaginable torture that Shalltear subjects to her minions. And don't forget, it could make you uncomfortable. In any case, through the twin pillars of punishment and reward, Shalltear molds her victims into her ideal slaves, toys, or pets. Once she is assured that they sufficiently fear her, she begins to grant them more freedom and initiative, opportunities to earn her favor and approval. Serving her eventually becomes something that they enjoy, and a permanent part of their psychology,
really sucks.
which,
Wow.
ironically, isn't even a necessary measure for a vampire. As I mentioned earlier, vampires are supposed to be able to turn their lesser vampires into obedient thrall, and Shalltear even demonstrates this ability during her operation in the kingdom. She turned one of the bandits into her slaves, so that she was then able to track down and locate their base.
The hypnotizing
So, if she can control people that way, and her vampire brides are already her obedient servants, then why the disturbing abuse?
Because she likes it. And it's like, it probably also, it's like, it's more permanent if, like, you actually molds them in that kind of way, as opposed to just hypnotizing them for a time. That's more likely to wear off, or you have to do it all more often. And also, it seems like she just gets off on hurting people. It's fun for her. Psychological torture. Like, I get it.
Unfortunately though, I'm not going to answer that question in this video.
I answered it.
I've decided
it's fine.
to split the Who is Shalltear into 2 parts, simply due to how lengthy it is. We're really only halfway through, and I need to record this before I leave for vacation. So I truly apologize for the abrupt stop.
It's okay.
But
I know the
hope
answer.
you're enjoying my recount of Shalltear's character. Anyway, before I go, feel free to check out the Bay merch in the description below. Unfortunately, there's no Shalltear Design, but that's always a possibility. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do.
We do. And I shall leave a like. It's okay. I know the answer. You don't have to tell me right now, AniNews. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this little bit of a dive into Shalltear. And I guess we will see you next time. Bye-bye.